Hey, everybody, this is Craig Garber. Welcome to Everyone Loves Guitar. And I've really got an incredibly talented bass player today. We're going to show some love to the rhythm section. I mean, Bryan Beller's, man, he's a multi-instrumentalist. He's most well known for playing bass, obviously, but he's a really brilliant musician. And so I'm just excited to have him on the show. A couple of quick announcements. Darren Charles, I want to say thank you for hooking us up, my man Darren from Godsticks. And make sure you get to everyonelovesguitar.com/subscribe to subscribe to the audio and video components of the show. All righty, Bryan Beller, talented and let me just tell you, I'm out of order and out of sorts. Bryan has a new album out. It is like, it's so great. I know I'm supposed to say this at the end, but it's called Scenes from a Flood. It's a double record. It's one of the best records I've heard this year, if not the best. It is fucking amazing, and I'm going to have him on another show to turn everybody onto it because it's a real deep work. It's got some great guitar. And Satriani is like tons of – we'll talk about it later, but anyway, I just had to get that off my chest.
Well,
thank you.
Thank you very much. and welcome everybody to the Everyone Loves Bass podcast. Not sure, actually. I'm you know, it's funny. I appreciate the fact of being able to be on here. If everyone loves guitar, I guess I must love guitar too, because I end up playing for all these guitarists. But that's just kind of the nature of the universe. There are more guitarists than there are bassists. And I figured that one out kind of like when I was, so it's just like, oh, wait a minute. I see how this works.
All right. Let me tell everybody about you, Bryan. Bryan's a talented multi-instrumentalist, sideman, and solo artist. He's most well known recently, well, for a while actually, for his touring and studio work with Joe Satriani and the Aristocrats. He's maintained a career as a bassist, composer, solo artist, writer, and clinician for over 25 years. He's been Joe's touring bassist since 2013. They did 3 world tours together, including a G3 tour with John Petrucci and Phil Collin of Def Leppard. We had Phil on the show. It's pretty funny.
Phil's a great
guy. He was on several cuts on Joe's 2015 release Shockwave Supernova, and a feature appearance in his tour documentary film called Beyond the Supernova. Bryan is going to be joining Joe on the Shape-Shifting World Tour once that kicks off post-apocalypse, whenever that is. He's also the I don't know what to say.
The waste plan.
How do you call it? He's also the bassist of the rock fusion super trio, the Aristocrats, with Guthrie Govan on guitar and Marco Minnemann on drums, and they're one of the hottest acts in their genre today. They released 6 critically acclaimed albums in the last 5 years. Their 6th album, 2019's record called You Know What, debuted at #2 on the Billboard Jazz chart. Their 4 successful world tours included joining Joe Satriani and Steve Vai for a G3 run in Europe. And as a result, Bryan's been profiled in many magazines, including cover features in Bass Player and Bass Musician. This is a very bad man, let me tell you.
Blah, 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 blah.
Bryan himself has released 4 solo albums, including this one I'm talking about. It's a prog. I don't even want to call it a prog record, man. It's like, what did you say? Pink Floyd cross with?
Well, it's a progressive instrumental, which is always slightly different than just straight up prog. You know,
yeah.
I mean, there are 3 vocal tunes on the album, but it's 18 songs, 88 minutes, and it's mostly instrumental. And I think it lives somewhere more in the kind of conceptual side of prog than maybe the notey side of prog. It's about atmosphere and melody and about conceptual themes throughout the album.
Right. And I would say atmosphere and melody are critical throughout, or the primary things throughout, which is why I dig it the most. Okay, so that record is called, I just said it, I'm losing my place. I'm all out of sorts. It's Scenes from the Flood. Sorry.
Yeah, Scenes from the Flood.
He's got a cast of all-stars, 26 musicians on the record, including Satriani, John Petrucci, Guthrie Govan, Mike Keneally, Mike Dawes, and more. A lot of those guys are on the show already. He's Bryan was also a sideman, playing, recording, or touring with, and he's done these typically on multiple projects over several years. Steve Vai, Dethklok, Mike Keneally, who he's been with for 17 years. Great player, Nick Johnston, who I'd love to get on here.
Yeah, Nick's great.
He's great sound, great tone he gets. Jane Getter, how did you hook up with her? She's over on the East Coast.
Adam Holtzman was a part of a project I was doing in an Austrian jazz festival, and we did this kind of Miles Davis thing together called Heavy Metal Miles.
Right.
And that's where I met him. He's a New York guy, but I met him in Austria.
That's pretty funny. Yeah.
And Jane is his wife. That's the connection. And Adam, they collaborate together musically as well.
Yeah. She's a great player. Of course, Godsticks with Darren Charles, Eros Ramazzoti. I've had a bunch of Cat Dyson played with him, and then somebody else. I've had a couple. He's had a lot of good guitarists.
Steve Vai produced a track for him, and then I played on the track. That's how it worked. I never met the guy, but I know he's like really famous.
He is in Italy. He's massive.
I know. He's like a big deal.
Marco Minnemann, really talented percussionist. Janet Robin we had on here, and also Dweezil Zappa and loads of other people. Bryan grew up in New Jersey, and he attended the Berklee College of Music in Boston, where he was this was interesting. He was primarily a groove-oriented blues rock bass player. And once he met drummer and Frank Zappa fanatic Joe Travers, he got into prog, jazz, and improv. Again, his last record, I'm going to just say one last thing about it. It's a double record called Scenes in the Flood. It's beyond great. And like I said, he's going to come back and we're going to have a separate episode. I just want to find out more about the record and turn everybody onto it. I'm exhausted. Bryan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
That's it. I don't have to say anything now. That's it. There it was. That was the interview.
We're done. Hey, how'd you first get started in music? And like, what was your first kind of break?
Oh, I mean, I was interested in music since before I was kind of like a sentient, I think, I was 3 years old banging around on my mom's piano, just playing stuff that sounded good to me. And then, so at 8 years old, I started taking classical piano lessons. At 10, I started playing upright bass in the orchestra. And then at 13, I switched to electric. But I was really playing more piano in my high school years than bass because I could play a whole song on the piano. So I used to just, listen to like Pink Floyd songs, Led Zeppelin songs, and figure them out by ear, and then play arrangements that I kind of made up on the fly on the piano. I'm sure they were hacky and terrible, but they were something. And then when I got to Berklee College of Music, when I was 18, I got a little bit more serious about bass. So I was really kind of late to the whole thing. I was not one of those, practicing with a metronome when I was 6 years old guys, who, there's a lot of those guys in my particular corner of the genre world, but I was not one of them for sure. And I was into prog. I wasn't like just playing blues rock before I met Joe and went to Berklee and everything. I was interested in prog before then, but not too much fusion or jazz or anything. That didn't happen until I got to Berklee. And also Joe Travers really introduced me to Frank Zappa, that was the big thing. But I was at Berklee and I was in a blues rock band and we were getting ready to move to New York. It was the age of the Spin Doctors and Blues Traveler. I mean, it was the early 90s. And then Joe Travers was already in Los Angeles, and I'm cutting a long story short here because I don't want to take up all the time with this, but he had already made his way to Los Angeles by himself independently with like barely $1 to his name and somehow landed the gig with Dweezil Zappa. And he had always wanted to be a part of the Zappa family world. That was his life's goal.
Right.
And then a few months after he got the gig, he was able to get me an audition for Dweezil Zappa as well. And I flew there, and I knew that if I got the gig, I would be leaving my band, I would be leaving my girlfriend, I would be moving to the other side of the country from where all my entire family lived. But that's how it works. And I did the audition, and thank God I passed the audition. And then 2 weeks later, I completely closed up shop of my entire life on the East Coast, and I moved to LA. That was how it started.
What were you feeling when you did that? Like, were you scared, or were you just like, man, this is my destiny?
Well, when you're 22,
yeah, that's true.
You're not smart enough to be scared.
Yeah.
You don't know, I can't remember who said this, but it's like, when you're that young, you don't know shit from shit.
Yes.
Yeah. So of course I was a little bit nervous. And I remember my girlfriend saying to me at the time, if you go there, I'm not moving with you. And I was just like, all right, well, that's that, I guess. And then, but the guys in my band, one of them was really upset. We had made all these plans, and what was I going to do? Not take the opportunity. But of course, they were upset. They had a right to be upset.
Yeah, but you'd get an audition you get to play with Dweezil Zappa out of.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. And listen, everybody in that band went on to be successful. Everybody. So the main songwriter is a guy named Dylan Altman, and he ended up writing a #1 hit for Tim McGraw. And is a big-time songwriter in Nashville. That's Dylan Altman. One of the other guitarists in that band, John Skivick, ended up touring with the Eels and the Gigolo Ants and Juliana Hatfield and a whole slew of alternative artists. The original drummer was Joe Travers. He moved to L.A. The drummer who took his place, Ben Caesar, he's been Brad Paisley's touring drummer for like 15 years. So that's wild. Everybody in that band went on to do something cool. So
they should be thanking you, man. You probably changed their destiny.
Yeah, life happens.
No, I'm not. I don't mean literally thanking you, but if you had stayed there, that probably wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. Well, the whole thing went the way it was supposed to go, I guess.
Yeah. Very cool. Was there any culture shock when you moved out to LA?
Oh yeah.
What was
Couldn't
the
believe
biggest-
how nice everybody was. I didn't care whether if they were fake. I didn't care. I just was just used to being snarled at, growing up in New Jersey.
Yeah.
Like, why are these waitresses all being nice to me?
Yeah, that's funny, man. That is funny. You said one thing there I wanted to ask you. Was your it sounds like your mom was super supportive. Was she into music as well, or?
They had a piano and she played piano, but she wasn't really into music. She just took piano lessons, and her mother had that piano. It was a grandma's piano. That's the weird thing about my family. I hear a lot of stories. Like, I know that Guthrie's parents were super musical, and you hear a lot of musicians. They actually do come from somewhat musical families.
Yeah.
Not mine. My dad was a corporate lawyer, and he actually worked for the district attorney in New Jersey for a while. They're prosecuting mobsters, and he argued in front of the Federal Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Philadelphia a couple times. Then he got into the corporate side. Harvard guy, a lawyer.
Yeah.
And my mom was a school teacher, and they both grew up in Brooklyn.
Very cool.
They were confused when I didn't want to go to an Ivy League school and wanted to be a musician instead.
Did they give you a lot of times when somebody's so well educated, like you get a law degree from Harvard, that's very prestigious. There's this huge pressure on the kid to follow in steps. It didn't sound like you really had that.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did.
Okay. And it was listen, my parents, God bless them, they were in their early 30s trying to figure this stuff out, and I was their oldest kid, and I didn't want to do any of the things that were supposed to be the route to success. Yeah. And they just didn't really know what to do. And then I got really angry because I was a kid, and I was a shitty kid. I grew up in a really well-to-do town, and they tried to give me every advantage, but they just had a blind spot that, if I wasn't going to go into the professional class, what was I going to do? Yeah. And, when you're 13 and 14, that shows up like, don't tell me what to do. And so then there were 3 years where it was really difficult, and there was a lot of bullshit between me and my parents. And, they were kids too. Right, they were 34, 35, that's the kids.
Yeah.
So eventually, we worked it out, and they God love them. They supported me and sent me to Berkeley. And once I got to Berkeley, I figured out where I really kind of belonged in the universe.
Very cool, man. And you became, in your profession, that top tier. So
I'm just happy to get a job,
I know, but you worked your ass off to do really well,
Well, I had advantages that a lot of other kids didn't have. I mean, for example, Joe Travers, his parents couldn't send him to Berkeley. He had to do loans and financial aid and everything, and he had to pay him off and everything like that. I mean, that's you hear the stories of college debt over and over and over and over again nowadays, and it's crushing. It's terrible.
Yeah.
And so, I am really, really, really in debt to my parents for helping me out with that.
That's very cool.
Making a living as a musician is hard enough.
Yeah. Yeah. Let alone to pay back student loans.
Yeah. So, but thank you, Mom and Dad.
You did good, kid. Okay. Once you got this gig with Dweezil, did that sort of turbocharge your career and lead to?
I would not say that it turbocharged my career so much as it established me as where in a genre that I was. As soon as you were in a band, Frank was still alive in September '93, although only for another few months, when I joined Dweezil's band. And anytime you were playing with anybody named Zappa, immediately you were bestowed upon this status.
Yeah.
And it wasn't really deserved for me. I just was in Dweezil's band, and we were playing kind of complicated rock music. It was hard to play, but it's no one would confuse what Dweezil does with what Frank does. And what Frank was doing was completely insane. It didn't matter. All he knew or heard was Zappa.
Right.
And then suddenly it's oh, you're one of those guys. And then I was introduced to Steve Vai, and I was introduced to Mike Keneally, because Mike Keneally was in Dweezil's band at the time.
Right.
And all the rest, So, and you got to remember at the time, like right now, now Dweezil has kind of dedicated his life to playing Frank's music, and that's a whole separate thing. But back in 1993 and 94, it was totally not like that. As a matter of fact, he was trying to do a thing that was really different. It was really kind of more like, complicated guitar rock, very kind of like extreme-ish, a lot of riffs, but like really, really weird, stuff. So there was some justification for like, oh, he's the guy who plays complicated stuff. But I was 22 and I hadn't done anything. And I didn't get any other gigs because I was, basically working for the Zappas on some kind of small but real retainer.
Okay.
And it wasn't until I left Dweezil's band with Mike Keneally 2.5 years later, because there just wasn't a lot of activity. We toured like 4 weeks in 2 years, and we made another record, but it took a long time. And, so eventually I kind of fell in love with Mike's music, and what Mike was doing was speaking to me kind of in a more deep sense. Yeah. And Mike also wanted to pursue his solo career. So Mike kind of made the decision to prioritize that first and foremost. And then him and Dweezil parted ways. And then I decided to join Mike on his journey and his quest. And that's when things really started kind of opening up, but they didn't open up right away. I think some people out there already know this story. I apologize if so, but soon after that happened, Mike Keneally was invited by Steve Vai to join the very first G3 tour as a part of Steve's band, the Satriani, Eric Johnston, Steve Vai tour. And Steve did not have a bass player for that band at the time. And Mike Mangini was the drummer. And Mike Mangini referred Philip Bino, and Mike Keneally referred me. And we had a private audition, one-on-one. I had never lost one of those auditions. And I played it as well as I possibly could. And I felt really, really good about it. And I didn't get the gig. And I was crushed because not only did I not get the Steve Vai gig, and think that was a huge gig, the first G3 tour, but not only did I not get that, but then suddenly Mike Keneally was gone for like 1.5 years. So we did one.
Oh, so your
suddenly I was
partner.
We did a solo tour where we opened up for Vai for 6 weeks, but suddenly I had no gig, I had no money, I didn't know how to hustle, and I was broke.
How did you? What happened? Like, how did you?
I got a job. I had started doing some remote recording, like around that time. I did a couple of things with James Labrie, and I did a couple of like one song sessions here and there with Steve Vai, but I really wasn't doing that much, and I didn't have it figured out at all. So it wasn't like my career exploded then either. I went and got a job at SWR, which is a bass amp company.
Okay.
And I paid off my debts.
Good for you.
But while I was there, I kind of got like a poor man's MBA, or a real world MBA, as they say, because as I stayed in the company, I kept, first I was doing testing amps, and then I was customer service, and then I was in artist relations, and then I was the export manager. So I got to know Europe. I traveled to Europe for the first time really extensively and met a bunch of distributors, did a lot of faxing back then. And then I was in product development. That was fun. Got to work with engineers to design bass amps I thought would be cool as a bassist. And then next thing I knew, I was in marketing. And then suddenly I was the vice president of the company. And then now it's 7 years after I joined the company, and the company has been sold to Fender. And Fender is asking me to basically lead the SWR division of their company. And that was
this whole time. Had you had any gigs?
I didn't really. I was doing less and less playing as this went along. Yeah. I was playing for the company, and I was playing to test amps, and I was playing in the sound room, and I was playing at the NAMM show when we set up the booth. But I wasn't doing nearly as many gigs or sessions. I was just playing like on the side.
Right. Okay.
And then when I got the gig at Fender, that was like a real heavy corporate thing. I was doing, big Excel workbooks, sales presentations, PowerPoint. I mean, like just the real thing. I developed this entire skill set that I never really intended to develop, but I did. And then in 2005, after 2 years, I kind of had like a life-changing experience where one of my best friends, who was a bass player named Wes Waymiller, who was my age, passed away from cancer. And I suddenly woke up and I was just like, what am I doing? I'm 34 and, I'm I'm spending all day, you know, kind of working on, not that there's anything wrong with people who choose to do this. I want to make sure that, you know, it's real easy to be like, oh, those corporate sellouts, you know, that's bullshit too. There's real valuable work being done at these companies. How else would we have equipment?
Yeah.
But I woke up and I was like, what am I doing with my life? And so I quit with no plan.
Oh, you just quit?
I just quit.
So, all right, just pause 1 second. When you quit, you just said, I gotta find myself. I gotta figure out what, this is not what or was some of that quitting part of the grief process for your friend?
You know, it's hard to know where that uncollapses.
Yeah.
You know, there was a lot of stuff layered in there. All I knew was I woke up and I was just like, that's it, I'm done. And I went into work and I was just like, I'm sorry, but I'm just done.
They must have looked at you like you were crazy.
Well, you know, what was weird, you know, there were things about corporate America that I guess I still don't really understand, or I didn't understand at the time, you know, because I had a great boss, a guy named Richard McDonald, who was one of the, you know, he really started off at the lower tier, you know, at the very bottom at Fender, worked his way up to a senior vice president of marketing, a very good guy. And he said to me, he was like, you know, do you need like more money or like a title or something? And I was like, it never even occurred to me that that would be a way that you could go about to get that.
Yeah. I don't
like, you know, like if I wanted a promotion and a raise, I wouldn't threaten to quit.
Yeah.
That would be such a shitty way to get it. But I guess people do that. I don't know. Anyway, I just said, listen, I appreciate that, but that I wouldn't, one, no, that's not it. And two, I just wouldn't do that.
Yeah, I have a hard time with stuff.
Yeah, he looked at me.
Like a passive aggressive way of approaching.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I'll never forget this. He just looked at me and he goes, "You're not done, are you?" And I was like, "Nope. I don't even feel like I'm gotten started."
Okay, cool.
And then we, you know, that was it. We just parted ways, and I moved to Nashville and started my whole life over.
Holy shit! That took a lot of balls.
Yeah, it was something. You know, so I moved to Nashville, and you know, I tried to establish a life there, and I was working my way into the scene there, and there were some people there who didn't really kind of trust me as a player because they're like, "Oh, you're that guy who plays all the notes," and I'm like, I can play groove. I can play 1-5. I can play anything you want. You know, just hire me.
And that's a tough scene to break into if you don't. Did you know anybody there?
I knew some people there, but it didn't really matter. I mean, like, you know, there's a classic line that it's like it's a 5-year town.
Yeah.
And that's probably true anywhere. But anyway, I was starting to work my way in, but not fast enough, and my savings were dwindling. Yeah. And I was starting to get to a point where I was going to have to make a choice about getting a job again, because I swore to myself I was never going to go into debt again.
Yeah.
And so I was down to like my last month. And then I heard that Steve Vai was having auditions for a new live band. And, you know, this is 11 years after that audition I didn't get. And to make an already long story somewhat shorter, you know, I went and did the audition, and this time I was auditioning against a lot of different people. And this time I got the gig. So it's such a weird kind of, you know, circle closing story. And I know that I approached it differently. I wasn't quite so wound up in my own need to prove that I could do the gig to Steve. You know, you get a little bit older, you know, and you start to realize, well, big deal if you can do the gig. Everybody who you would consider hiring can obviously do the gig. That's like requirement number one. Yeah. So like, what do you have? What intangibles do you offer aside from that? Are you listening? What's your sound like? Blah, blah, blah. And for whatever reason, he chose me. And so then I did, that was the Sound Theories tour. That was 2007. So now this is 14 years after I moved to LA. And this was like really the first major tour I'd ever gotten.
And you got there through Nashville. Isn't that
yeah,
funny?
I toured with Mike Keneally several times, and we worked together a lot in the intervening years, but it was always pretty kind of DIY. And,
Okay.
you know, Mike Keneally is an amazing artist, but he's pretty eclectic. And, you know, just not everybody gets it, you know? So we would be doing club tours and stuff like that. I had never toured on a bus. I had never, you know, done Europe really like that and an 8-week tour in the States like we did. And we did it. And then right after that, the Dethklok gig happened where Brendan Small reached out to me. Again, that was because of Mike Keneally, that he had a relationship with him. And I'll tell you this, after the Steve Vai tour, the Dethklok tours happened back to back, I never got a call for a gig in Nashville again.
Oh, you were done at that point, man.
Not one. They were. I didn't say don't call me.
Yeah, but
They
you
were
know,
just-
out of sight, out of mind, and then you're
Yeah.
off doing like that kind of music. It's just
So now, this is a long answer, very long answer to your short question of when did your career take off? That was the real igniting point.
Yeah.
It was 2007 and 8 when I did Vai and Dethklok back to back. And then I did a couple more Dethklok tours, but not another Vai tour because he didn't tour again for a while. And then in 2011, the Aristocrats' first show happened. And then
together.
It's a story that's been told many times, but I had already been doing some work with Marco Minnemann, again, someone I met through Mike Keneally. And we did this gig in Vladivostok, Russia, of all places, with me and Marco Minnemann and Greg Howe.
Okay.
As a guitar trio. And Greg's great.
Yeah, he sure is.
And I got invited to do this bass bash concert at NAMM. And I'd already done it with my own band, you know, my 5-piece band. And I thought I would do something different. Hey, let's just bring this Greg Howe, Marco Minnemann, me trio. It's already ready to go. And we just did that gig a couple months ago. And so we booked it. And then about a month before the gig, something came up for Greg and he couldn't do it. And someone on Facebook had been sending me messages. His name is Colin Green. I'm going to, you know, it's like, why don't you just say my name already?
Out him,
I've been
Colin
telling
Green.
the story for years.
Colin Green, there you go.
These videos, he was sending me these messages like, you've played with Steve Vai, you've played with Mike Keneally, now you're going to play with the world's next greatest guitarist, Guthrie Govan. Watch this video. And, you know, I remember just getting that message and being like, whoa, you know, and I didn't watch it, you know, but he persisted. He kept sending me videos. And finally, I remembered when Marco and I were talking, like, well, we got to get a guitarist. What are we going to do? And I thought, hey, I wonder if this guy's any good. And then I watched the video and I was like,
yeah.
And I'm like, how is it possible that I don't know who this person is? Like, I'm in this scene. I know a lot of people, but like, I've never really heard of this guy. And so then I go to look for him online. And this is the best part. He doesn't exist online.
He has no social media presence.
He's not on Twitter. He's not on Facebook. I found his website, and it's a static page of a picture of him with no links on it. Who does that?
That's really funny.
And I went back to Marco, and I'm like, this is the weirdest thing I ever saw. Like, does this guy really exist? Is this guy like Sid Finch or something? You know? And so that's really you get that reference?
No, but the whole thing. No, who's Sid Finch? But
Sid Finch it was an April Fool's joke that Sports Illustrated played in the 1980s about, you know, a pitcher who was like supposedly the greatest pitcher that no one had ever heard of.
Oh, okay, cool.
Throw 160 mile an hour fastball, and he was at the Mets training camp a while. It turned out to be an April Fool's joke. Like, is this
that's
guy
very
like,
cool?
And so eventually I got his email address, wrote him an email. It took him 4 days to respond, but he finally did in very well-spoken English. And he was going to be at NAMM, and we did the gig, and the rest is history. We did the gig. The people really, really responded. I've done a lot of gigs, and I had not seen a response to a gig like that in a while. People went nuts.
That's great.
And that was after that we decided we should be a band. And then the Aristocrats happened. But that was the first album. And then in 2013, we were making the second album, and that's when Joe Satriani called me again because Mike Keneally had referred me. So I ended up going on tour with Joe Satriani in 2013 while the Aristocrats' second album cycle happened. And then finally, I was able to do better than subsistence living in a career as a musician. So I always tell people, you know, that when it comes to being a musician, I was a 42-year-old overnight success.
So few questions there. First of all, Mike Keneally's, he's the guy who turned me on to Joe and Satriani. He's great with turning people. He's, you know, and he cares and he's likes you and he believes in you. He's really nice like that. That had to feel great when you're at NAMM and you got that warm reception. You must have felt some sort of finally, or wow, this is.
It was actually crazy, and I don't want to tell another long story here, but that gig almost didn't happen because the organizer ended up like with leukemia, and he had to go to the hospital for emergency chemotherapy. And so the gig was canceled 3 days before it happened, and then it was resurrected by a couple other people who were his friends to try and turn it into a benefit for him. And so the whole thing was really chaotic.
Wow.
There was a lot of energy around that gig, just frenetic energy. So it probably stands to reason that something like the Aristocrats came out of that night, because it was a wild, wild week and an extremely wild night when that happened. It all happened really fast.
And once then you got back out with Joe, and when you said I was a 42-year-old overnight sensation, once that you started getting in motion and financially and gig wise, you were like, hey man, I'm kind of like, this is what I've always wanted. How did you react to that? Like, did you give yourself a pat on the back? Did you say, you know, what was your mindset?
Well, I of course I was really, really happy, you know, when the Joe Satriani thing came down, and along with the Aristocrats thing, I never really knew what it would feel like to actually have to start looking at the thing. Okay, in 3 months, I need more gigs. Like what's it going to be?
Right.
You know, where's the money going to come from? So it was a huge relief to finally not really, you know, be in that kind of a position. But also, the Joe Satriani thing was a really kind of a different kind of muso or instrumental rock gig, because the material was not as complex. It was more just kind of groove and melody oriented. And I really, really appreciated that. And what I found was that the Joe Satriani on one hand and the Aristocrats on the other, because the Aristocrats, that's a pretty aggressive, wild trio.
Yes.
It was a good balance. It was a good balance musically, and having both projects. Because I never imagined that the Aristocrats would become a world touring entity, but it did. And so there were two world touring entities in my life, and that pretty much crowded out everything else. So there was a little bit of road rash from all that road work. Yeah. But that was what I had always wanted. I always wanted to max out, you know, and be a musician, and that meant touring. I never found myself going down the studio route primarily, although of course I do studio sessions. So there it was. Of course I was happy.
Was it a big dichotomy? It was probably a good balance that you were a sideman in one project and a band member in another.
Not yet. Well, I was a band member in one. Well, I was a sideman in one project, and then I was a band member / manager in the other.
Right, yeah, that's what I would figure. Because I know you're like, we'll talk about this afterwards. You're really comfortable with marketing, which is
I'm, you know, again, all that work at SWR and Fender. I mean, I was writing ad copy for them. I'm not sure if it was any good or if I was, you know, actually being strategic about it. I just knew what the product did for me.
Right.
And so I was trying to give that magic to the world.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, I had working at a company like Fender. I mean, that's like a big company. You know, a couple thousand people, shared resources. Managers have responsibility without authority, which is a common occurrence in corporate America. You know, you're responsible for this, but you don't have the authority to just walk over to a group of 25 and say, now you do this, you do this, you do that. You have to, you know, share those resources with other managers who have been tasked with other things. And then suddenly you have to learn the you know, corporate diplomatic communication skills and all the rest of that stuff. But also you need to know the nuts and bolts of accounting. Yeah. And be able to put together fairly complicated spreadsheets to prove your points, to justify what it is that you want to do. And compared to that level of complexity, managing a band's finances and directives seemed pretty simple.
Yeah,
So,
I'm sure.
So I took on that task in 2012, and I did it until just last year. And it was, I mean, it helped. You know, we didn't have to pay another manager an exorbitant amount of money, and then we didn't have to worry about whether or not we could trust somebody else. And
sure.
It turns into a whole other thing at that point. But yeah, it was a good balance to have like a lot of responsibility and really investment in the whole thing in one project, and then to just be able to show up as like a cushy sideman.
A sideman,
yeah.
Great. Tell me the top 3 experiences you've had musically. Could be any reason.
Well, you know, I mean, you know, the Dethklok tour that I did in 2009, where we co-headlined with Mastodon, that was like the closest that I ever have gotten to like feeling like a real traditional kind of rock star lifestyle thing. Like it was, those guys are real rock stars, the Mastodon guys, and they're great musicians, but they were also wild at the time. I know that they've mellowed out a little bit, but in 2009 they released Crack the Sky, which to me that's the Mastodon album, and they were playing it every night from top to bottom. And we would stay inside stage, and we never got tired of it. And then Dethklok was a big thing back then. I mean, it was a really kind of a real crossover phenomenon, as they say, you know, with the television show. For those who aren't familiar with it, Dethklok is based off of an animated cartoon called Metalocalypse on Cartoon Network, and the premise is that there's this death metal band, and they're the biggest act in the world, like bigger than like Prince, Madonna, Michael Jackson, and the Beatles combined, and the world's economy rises and falls with their record releases. And, you know,
we need them back out here right now.
Yeah, you're right. They're all complete celebrity spoiled idiots. And there's a lot of inside music humor, but there's also just like plain regular good general humor stuff in there. It was a funny show, and it was really edgy, and it was a big hit. And we would go out and play this band's music because they made real music, because Brendan Small, the guy behind it, was a genius, and he was a Berkeley guy too. And he could write really, really legitimate metal music. That was the punchline. The joke was that it wasn't a real band. The punchline was that the music was solid as shit. So we would go out. It was the most fun gig ever. So Dethklok 2009 tour with Mastodon, that's one. Playing with the Metropole Orchestra in Holland, you know, I did that with Steve Vai and Mike Keneally, and I did it with Vai first, and that was in the early 2000s, and that was really fun because, you know, I was in a high school band and it was kind of drag, but I always imagined like what could it be if it was like fun and cool, and that's what it was like if it was fun and cool, because everybody in the Metropole Orchestra in Holland, those players are all motherfuckers, all incredible sight readers who could also improvise, just a truly superstar collection of orchestra players. And they had, you know, room to be able to collaborate with rock musicians. So got to play some really cool stuff with Vai, his catalog material, and some original stuff he wrote for the orchestra. But my favorite moment with the Metropole was with Mike Keneally. Mike Keneally has an album called The Universe Will Provide.
Yeah, we talked a lot about that. It was funny.
It is a deep, heavy album. I wouldn't call it easy listening, but if you're into, you know, modern classical, and it's not just modern classical like, you know, avant-garde noise. It's like there's rhythm section, there's rock stuff in there too, but it's all Keneallyized. It's really unique, and that material was so deep. And when I was a big fan of the Universal Provide record before he put it out, so I knew what it sounded like, but then to actually have to read those charts and play them with a bunch of other motherfuckers who were reading the charts, and have that piece of music come to life and play it live with an orchestra. I remember just thinking to myself, God, does it get any better than this? It was really, really great. And then I would say, you know, the third thing is, you know, there have been some Aristocrats shows where when everything goes right, the sound is really good. And all three of us, which is not easy to do, feel like we had a great show, and the room is right and the atmosphere is right. You know, those shows can be pretty transcendent. And it's kind of hard to pinpoint just one, because, you know, there's only a couple on each tour that we all agree that were really good. But I would just say that in general, when that goes well, it goes really well.
Is that, you met Darren, he opened up for you guys, and then you opened up for, who was headlining that, or was you headlining that, he was opening for you?
Yeah, Darren's band Godsticks has supported both Mike Keneally and the Aristocrats in a couple tours of the UK. and Darren is the hardest working guy in show business. He's really talented too. He's a great writer, great interviewer, and a great he's got clinician skills because he's a gear expert. He does gear writing for magazines, and he's a good songwriter, singer,
guitar player.
Yeah,
I know his voice is excellent.
He does it all.
Yeah, he's
and he's on my solo album too. He's on the song called "The Storm." I just felt like I needed a layer of rhythm guitars on this really, really heavy kind of progressive metal tune, and I heard his guitar sound on his album, the Gnostics album, "Faced with Rage," I think it was called, and it's such a great heavy guitar sound. I was like, can you just like add a layer of that sound to this on all these parts? And he didn't. It made the whole song.
That's cool, man. Yeah, he's a good guy. What were some of the low points or dark periods you've had to deal with, and how'd you get through them?
Well, when I lost the Vai audition back when I was 25 years old and was broke, and that was pretty dark. Yeah. And I dealt with it, like I said, by getting a job and just kind of starting over. But I also I had this fantasy that I was going to become a novelist for a little while, and so I wrote this manuscript that I was working with an editor, and I didn't understand anything about story, and it didn't go anywhere. But I learned how to write. I practiced for a year and a half just my writing, and so what ended up being a really, really useful application of my time, I ended up writing columns for Bass Player magazine, and I just became very, very comfortable with writing in the literary sense.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it's a much more direct creative outlet for me than music. Because
you still write?
There's no gear in the way. Not for magazines or anything like that, but I'm always I do blog style posts on Facebook. I know that's like super old school. Nobody does that. To have like a 3-paragraph post, I'll still do that. And if you want to read it, great. If not, you can just look at the picture and do a thumbs up comment, whatever.
I think it's only like as a guy who grew up in long form copywriting, it's only bad if it's boring. People read that stuff that's interesting. If it's not interesting, that's when you're screwed,
Yeah. Yeah. So, that was one thing. And, there's always low points, but I've been fortunate,
Yeah.
I've had more high points.
It's interesting because I had Philip Bino on the show recently, and Philip
and I have a funny relationship. Whenever he'll always yell "Con" when he knows me, because we have this kind of frenemy thing going on. He's funny.
But he had the same experience when he lost out. I thought it was to you on one audition, or he lost out to.
Wasn't Billy Sheehan the bass player after him? I mean, I don't know.
Well, that's what happened. Basically, Billy Sheehan became available, and he was like, "Okay." And Vi was like, "All right, hey, I'm going to go out with Billy." And Philip's like, "Wait, like my."
I know. And I remember when that happened. I remember when Philip was the bass player. And listen, Philip and Mike Mangini had known each other forever. They go all the way back to Boston together.
Yeah, they grew up together.
The Rick Berlin Band, which I'm not sure anybody ever saw, but I saw them, when I was a student at Berkeley, and they were doing all sorts of cool shit. So, they had a relationship. It made sense that they were going to be the rhythm section together on that tour. But, I still held out hope that one day I would be Steve Vai's bass player. And then when Philip wasn't the bass player anymore, I saw Billy Sheehan was doing it again. I'm like, great, now I'll never get it.
Yeah, it's just funny how this all works.
Yeah.
But you got a good story, man. I'm happy everything worked out. Is there any, like, if you had to give any advice to post haste learning all these things, anything you would have wished you could have told yourself that would have made life easier for you? Could be business.
I would try and give myself the advice to not be so easily affected by external opinions, events, whatever, and just trust that the way that I do things is the right way for me. My life is organized in probably an unusual way for most people. I don't own many things. I live in a remote area, and I spend a lot of time alone. This whole isolating thing is not new to me. Yeah. I wouldn't wish this on, this is a bad reason to isolate, but I've been isolating in between tours for a while now. And I have a lot of little weird things that I do in my life. And I the way that I organize projects and the way that I go about my work day, it's and then also with social media, which is just kind of a natural human outgrowth of the way humans interact anyway. The way that
you think so? I don't think so.
Yeah, it just makes it a lot more efficient.
Well, I think it's
like gasoline on a fire. It accelerates the way that human clusters interact. Certain people get along, certain people don't get along, and then there's conflict, and then people want to talk about things, and all those things are present in human nature and social settings already. Anyway, social media just throws them all together really, really fast, pours gasoline on it, and then lights a match.
That analogy I like. Yeah, the gasoline on fire. That I think makes sense. Yeah.
But there's a lot of so what is it called, like normal life and social life. There's a lot of enforced social interaction that it was always a bit much for me. It may not seem like it, but I'm actually very introverted, and I need a lot of time alone. Yeah. So there's that, and there's other things. You'd get too worked up about what somebody said or somebody did, and it was all a matter of not really knowing who I was and not trusting that what I thought was best for myself would be okay. Yeah. And that translates musically as well as personally and everything. So if I could go back and just give my younger self a little advice to be like, just chill, just trust that it's okay. Trust that your way, which is not what everybody would do, or maybe not what anyone would do, is the right way for you.
Yeah. No, go ahead. I apologize.
I think I can't remember where I read that somewhere said that the root of all suffering is essentially not really being who you are.
That is one of the things, the most important takeaways that I have gotten out of being around so many musicians. The value of just sort of doing what's pure to yourself. You guys are and maybe creative people in general, I would say, are probably great with that. And that there's a tremendous amount of liberation in that.
Yeah. And, I have to be honest, I'm not sure I really, really kind of came upon it in a holistically applicable way until I was, about 45.
Dude, I didn't either. You beat me.
Yeah. I stumbled and bumbled around, in all sorts of things. And, I was pretty hard charging and still can be, but I probably would have just like sat my younger self down and be like, just chill.
Just relax. Yeah.
It's so wound up about everything.
Yeah.
Not everything is a red light priority. Sometimes like, the old adage about like, you're standing at the bottom of a hill and there's 10 rocks rolling down towards you. What do? And the answer is nothing at first, because by the time the 10 rocks are rolling down the hill, 9 of them are going to be going in a different direction. You're only going to have to dodge one.
Right. That's good. I never heard that.
When you're young, all you think is 10 rocks.
Yeah. I think a lot of that, what you're saying, is to do with the youth and not just knowing and having the confidence that you tend to get as you get older. And yeah. Thank you, man. I appreciate you sharing that.
I was an arrogant kid. I thought I knew everything.
Wow. A lot of people I've spoken to, I wasn't surprised at all. You said you're kind of introverted. More people that are musicians, there's loads of introverts, and music's the way that they step out of that in some extent. But I wasn't surprised at all. With that being said, man, you're pretty communicative, which is nice.
Well,
you're not a bashful introvert.
No, I you know what it is I have this moment, right? I'll do this, and then like for the next hour, like I just need to kind of tune out and like go very, very insular.
I totally get that, where you just like, you need downtime. I totally get it. I've spoken to a lot of people like that.
But this is, when you're a musician, especially this day and age, this is part of the job. You can't just hide and expect people to find you.
Well, you can, but no one's going to find you.
I know I told the story about Guthrie Govan. He's 1 in a billion.
Yeah.
Okay. It doesn't happen like that for just about anybody.
Yeah.
It's just, you have to tell people what you're doing and what you're about, because no one's going to do it for you.
Or you at least got to have a contact tab on your website.
Even just an Easter egg.
Yeah, something, man. Hey, musically, tell me top 2 or 3 concerts that you've seen that you've enjoyed.
Oh God. Well, I mean, I saw the Roger Waters Pink Floyd The Wall show. And there's a
Really?
reason
Do you know Robbie?
I,
Who's the singer?
I don't know Robbie. I know Dave Kilminster.
Oh yeah. That's so cool, man.
Yeah. Again, that's through Guthrie. That was a great show. And The Wall was a huge record for me, and it impacted Scenes from the Flood in a lot of really, really deep ways. I saw, so I remember in 1994, I was dating this very mild-mannered, very kind of like seemingly conservative suburban type. And, she looked like kind of like a tennis mom, and I don't say that to just denigrate. It's just that was her vibe.
Yeah.
And I remember her telling me, I really like this band Nine Inch Nails, and would you like to come to a concert with me? And I said, sure. And it was at the Universal Amphitheater, and it was 1994, and it was the Downward Spiral tour, and Marilyn Manson was opening up for him on their first nationwide tour ever. And holy shit, did I not know what I was walking into? I mean, that was one of those shows where it's like 1,800 people in there and everybody knew every word. And it was so intense.
Wow.
That was one of the greatest shows I ever saw, the Nine Inch Nails Downward Spiral show. Also, I saw the Master of Puppets tour in 1986. Crap. It wasn't with Cliff on bass. It was with Jason on bass. Only been in the band for 3 weeks, but it was December 1, 1986. That was another electrifying show. Just one of those shows where you just looked around and you're like, these guys are going to take over the world.
So your tennis gal, did she turn into like a vixen immediately in your mind overnight?
Well, I never looked at her quite the same way again.
Yeah, that would have been like.
No, I'm just like, I remember let's think like. You have some issues? Say something about me? Anyway, that was funny. But also, I saw the Rage Against the Machine Evil Empire tour.
Yeah, they're great.
That was amazing. I saw the Radiohead OK Computer tour with Mike Keneally.
Dude, you've seen some great shows, man.
Yeah, he dragged me to that show. Was not a Radiohead fan. He's like, Bryan, you were coming with me to this show. And I watched them play the whole OK Computer album, and I didn't have it.
That's
and I remember just thinking, what a collection of great songs. Oh my God. And then I went out and I bought the album.
Yeah.
And I saw Soundgarden on the Down on the Upside tour. That was their last tour.
Wow.
I got to see some great bands in their prime. I never saw Nirvana. I don't get to go to shows that often anymore because I'm always on the road.
Some great shows, man. Favorite musicians you've enjoyed playing with? And I'll issue the disclaimer for you. If he doesn't mention your name, it doesn't mean this is like a
I don't want to
answer that. Okay,
I don't
no
even
problem.
want to go there.
Totally cool.
So, between Steve Vai, Joe Satriani, Mike Keneally, Guthrie Govan, and Brendan Small, and Dethklok, and all these other great people. I mean, like, what do you say?
Yeah, what's left? I know.
All I would say is that I have been extraordinarily blessed and fortunate, and it all does go back to the Dweezil Zappa thing. Somehow you get bestowed in this little rep, when you're in Zappa world, turns into like, oh, he's a muso, he must play.
Yeah.
And then suddenly you start talking to other people. It all started from there. So, Dweezil and Mike Keneally especially introduced me to a ton of people. And it all just happened from there.
Tell me your, just for this moment, top 3 Desert Island discs.
Nine Inch Nails, Deviations, which is the like completely massively expanded edition of The Fragile. All of the tracks that he was working on for that album. It's like 2.5 hours of music. It's an absolutely comprehensively excellent body of work. Truly insanely good. I would probably take Janet Fetter's album, This Close.
Wow. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I'm gonna check her out.
It's an amazing record. And oh man, I Pink Floyd Animals. It's funny how of the big 4 albums, Dark Side of the Moon, Wish You Were Here, Animals on the Wall, that's the one that gets the least amount of play, but that's the one that stuck with me the most as an adult.
That's some incredible music. I mean, I don't care if it gets. a massive Floyd fan.
Yeah, great composition. I mean, truly the triumph of atmosphere, sound, and vibe over, technical musicality.
Yeah.
In the grandest sense.
Yeah. Well, but I would say nothing that they're not like technical, guys. I mean, they're very all competent and beautiful.
But none of them were like the technical players that a lot of the guys in their genre were. None of them. I mean, Gilmour's thing is very special, but it's definitely not technical.
No,
Roger Waters is a total meat and potatoes bass player, but super melodic.
Yeah.
And definitely understood groove and patterns. Richard Wright was just a soundscape guy.
Amazing. And Nick Mason.
And Nick Mason was a very kind of basic groove drummer who, in stuff like the 1971 Live at Pompeii, and you can hear him let loose a little bit on some of the middle 70s stuff. But no one would have ever like confused him with John Bonham or Ginger Baker or anything like that.
No, definitely not. No, but he holds down a groove like a fucking Swiss watch.
This is the thing, is that, of course, I never got to see them live as that four-piece. I did see the Momentary Lapse of Reason tour in '86, but there was a second drummer on stage with them, and Roger wasn't there, and it was just different. If you listen to the one time that they played live after the band, exploded in 1980, it was like at that Live 8 concert.
Yeah, when Waters and Gilmour took the stage.
They took the stage together and they played with the original lineup. And you could hear the reason why they sounded like they did. And every band really essentially is one sound. It's the sound of these four different guys making the sound that they make naturally combined into a sound.
Yeah.
And the sound of those four guys together, the same thing that you heard on like Echoes,
right?
All the way back in '71, to as late as, the stuff on the wall.
Yeah.
When you listen to them play together, suddenly you hear it. You hear how like, there's this kind of like really rootsy, bluesy kind of like push and pull time thing that Nick Mason does, and the organ sounds that Richard Wright used, and, the pick bass playing that Roger Waters would do, and the way that he played with Nick, and then Gilmour doing the Gilmour thing. It's like, that's the sound of Pink Floyd. That's the sound of those four guys. The studio records were really dressed up, and of course they sound amazing, but in the end, it's those four guys.
Yeah.
And when I heard that, I was just like, right. That's why I like this band.
Yeah, it's very true. It's a sound of them together. In any band, it's one sound.
Yeah.
All righty, tell me what makes you happy.
Nature makes me happy. Mountains make me happy. Hiking makes me happy. Going on for like a long day hike, like 10 miles, being somewhere really remote, on a nice high up view somewhere in the Southwest, preferably. That's my preferred climate.
Like New Mexico, you mean? Stuff like that?
Southern California,
okay.
Arizona, right. But there's parts of Southern California that I think are the most beautiful places in the world.
Yeah.
I have a motorcycle, and I like being out, really in kind of beautiful isolated roads. And as far as like my quote unquote leisure activities, that makes me really, really happy. And this kind of quiet and serenity that comes along with that.
Yeah.
When it comes to music, I love it when things sound good. It's everything. The sound of something is everything. When an onstage, mix, when you're playing live, when it sounds really good, and the barriers to being able to try and hear something are removed, and the barriers that any problems or issues you're having with your gear are removed, and the sound is something great, then suddenly you're in a kind of a pristine musical space, and magic can happen. Same thing when I listen to recorded music. I just love it when things sound great. Now, of course, that's not completely subjective. I mean, objective. There's subjectivity. What one person thinks sounds good is different than somebody else. So I have to qualify that. But when it sounds good to me, I guess.
All right. So this is a tough question, man. What do you like most about yourself?
you know,
your expression was priceless.
You know, I like to think that I honor my work commitments. That when I say I'm going to do something around my work, that I really do it, and I do it as thoroughly and to the best of my ability as possible. And so I become passionate about it. And, you know, that can be intense for some people. And it's probably why I am not one of those people who takes on a lot of different projects. You know, you see some musicians who are like collaborating with like 10, 15 different people all the time. Mm-hmm. That, you know, that's because their energy requires that and feels comfortable with all of that energy swirling around them. I am not like that. I prefer to focus on a couple things because I feel like I need to bring whatever it is that I have to bear on something. That's the best way to bring the best effort that I can produce, is if I'm undistracted by a lot of different things going on at the same time. And again, that goes back to the other conversation of what do I feel most comfortable, you know, just being comfortable with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, do the thing that works best for you. You know, there's a whole aspect of like, you know, self-marketing and networking in your career. Oh, you want to work with as many people as possible. Never say no to anything. And that whole thing. I disagree. For me,
which is all that counts,
beginning,
man.
when you're starting, you know, you really need to network and make it and make yourself available for everything. But when you get to a certain point, sometimes the word no is actually valuable. You know, you want to make sure that your energies are focused with things that are aligned with you. And so I tend to choose my work projects very carefully because I know when I say yes, it's going to be all in.
You're all in. Yeah, that's really good. Who's had the biggest influence on you, Bryan, both musically and personally?
You know, musically, you know, Mike Keneally is obviously, just because he's introduced me to so many different playing scenarios, in addition to the wide panoply of styles that he brings to his own artistry. Yeah. So he's probably been the most impactful person on my musical life. That's pretty much without question. Although, you know, I've been spending all this time with Guthrie Govan and Marco Minnemann, and I've learned a lot from them as well, because, you know, we've been this band for 9 years now.
Yeah.
But really, in the end, it is Mike Keneally. You know, personally, I don't want to get into that, but I will say that someone said to me once, the universe is a kind and patient teacher.
Right on.
And it's one of the best lines of advice I've ever gotten from anybody.
I want to go on the record. This is the first time someone's used the word panoply on the show. There you go. So you're the winner for this week.
Okay. My 10-cent word.
Biggest business win and biggest personal win?
Well, you know, the biggest business win, you know, was probably, you know, just really just in general, just being able to kind of do better than just subsistence living as a musician. And so that moment in 2013, like I described before, when the Aristocrats' second album, which was called Culture Clash, came out, and we did our first true world tour, and I got the Joe Satriani gig at the same time. That moment kind of ignited the career that I have today. And so it was that moment.
Awesome.
Personally, you know, I don't want to get into that.
All good. Favorite place you've traveled?
Well, I love Spain, you know, but that's probably only because it reminds me so much of California. I mean, there's great things all over the world. I think Iceland is pretty cool. And I haven't seen enough of Australia, but I really like Australia. But I'm a desert, mountain, Southwesty guy. Even though I grew up in New Jersey, and it's not like that there at all. I knew when I got here that this was where I belonged.
That's cool.
So it's interesting to have traveled as much as I have, and to say, oh, yeah, the world is really beautiful, and there's all these wonderful places, but the place I love most is home.
which is awesome. You're fortunate to be able to do that.
Yeah.
2 more questions, man, and thank you for everything. Toughest decision you've had to make, or most difficult thing you've had to do?
Well, you know, speaking professionally, that moment in when I was 25 years old and didn't have any other gigs and was young and didn't have much of a reputation and had to make the decision whether or not to kind of stay in Dweezil Zappa's band or go with Mike Keneally. That was a pretty heavy decision.
Yeah.
And so it was difficult at the time, but it turns out to be literally the single best decision I ever made in my whole life. So
great, man.
I got a little lucky there, because you're 25, you don't know. You think you know, but you don't.
Right.
And I just went with my gut. I felt like, you know, Mike Keneally is a very, very talented, generous, warm guy, and somehow I feel right with him.
He's got a depth of intuition that is very deep and really smart.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
Yeah,
he's brilliant and incredibly witty and funny.
Yeah,
just a great guy to be around. And that was, in the end, that was what mattered to me. And you know, I did a lot of stupid things in my 20s. I mean, a lot, but I got that one right, and that was the most important one. So
good, man. And last question, what's been the biggest change in your personality over the last 10 years? And how much of that has been intentional and how much has been just a natural part of aging?
Well, yeah, I mean, what's the chicken and the egg on that? You know, does age bring, you know, a new way of thinking, or does a new way of thinking, you know, develop just because you were around for longer? I mean, like, I don't know, but I would say that I'm more aware of my inner dialogue than I was in my 20s and 30s. And so I'm able to, you know, manage situations that may have become kind of messy conflicts or more difficult in my mind than they needed to be, a little bit more efficiently. And now it's like, oh, right, you know, okay, that's, you know, you're thinking about this because of X, you know.
Yeah, that's important. Yeah,
what's, you know, is this really about this, or is this about something that happened 10 years ago? You know,
yeah, because you get triggered by shit.
Yeah,
and it's like,
yeah.
Wait a minute. And if you don't have that awareness, you can go into a deep fucking rabbit hole.
Exactly. So when you're younger, you know, you just you react really quickly and not always well. You know, I think the one thing that I've gained, you know, and I don't have mastery around this every time. Sometimes I still will react. Like, we all react.
Sure.
But I'm getting better at the 24-hour rule thing. In kind of, well, just, you know, if something shows up and it's kind of like a hot communication in your email inbox, or someone says something weird, just wait.
Oh, don't respond right away.
Yeah. Just don't respond right away. And not everything needs a response.
No, absolutely.
You know, sometimes the best response is no response.
Yeah.
This is political and always a little bit fraught with peril, but since there's both sides that can come into play in this, and maybe it'll be a universal lesson for everybody. You know, some people roll their eyes at this story, I know, but I found it to be quite profound. This was in 2008, when Bill O'Reilly still had a television show on for international listeners. This is a kind of a conservative talk show host on Fox.
Kind of
an American conservative.
He's like an uber conservative.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, you know, some people would say he's not. So it's like, you got to be careful.
That's very funny.
Anyway,
you're right.
he was a very, very popular talk show host, and you know, it was a lot of people watched him. And Hillary Clinton had lost the nomination to Barack Obama, and it was a very, very, you know, hard fought. There were a lot of hard feelings on both sides there back in those days. And Bill O'Reilly had Bill Clinton on as his guest. And Bill Clinton wanted to come on and promote something that he was doing with the Clinton Global Initiative and get, you know, people to invest in a kind of a charity thing. That was his thing. He wanted to come on and promote his thing. So he thought, well, I'm going to make this trade. I'm going to have to take questions from Bill O'Reilly about some things I don't want to have to talk about in order to promote this thing I want to promote. That was the obvious play. And eventually, of course, Bill O'Reilly started in on him about the Hillary Clinton race that she had just lost, and was trying to kind of get him to say something newsworthy, about Barack Obama, who was going to be the Democratic nominee. And of course, everybody was watching to see if he was going to kind of blow that up. So his question to Bill Clinton was, don't you think that Hillary Clinton was treated unfairly by Barack Obama and the rest of the Democratic Party and da-da-da-da-da? And of course, he knew the answer was yes. And Bill Clinton just sat there for a couple seconds and did that thing he always does where he bites his lip, right? And he said, "Nothing good can come from me answering that question, and no good will come to America by me discussing this at all." And Bill O'Reilly just laughed, which was not something that he often did in the middle of those situations because he was super intense. He just laughed because it was true.
It is true.
And things are funny because they're true. We laugh because it's like an involuntary response to like a sudden shared truth. That's what laughter is, And I remember thinking to myself, how often would it be? I mean, there's so many times where I could say something where it's just be like, and it's just like, what good will come of this? Nothing good will come of this.
Right on. That is such a smart question to ask yourself, man. How is this going to help me?
Yeah. How is this going to help me, and how is this going to help people that I know and care about? I mean, sometimes just to maintain integrity, you got to say something that's uncomfortable to somebody at some point or another, but not every time.
No, you're 100%.
It's certainly not every time. You look around on social media, you just see people yelling at each other about all sorts of things, and you're like, is that all really necessary? All of it?
Yeah, that's where I'm like,
people making stands, okay, but is it really necessary? I mean, so now we'll just bring this back into like the music world here. What is, what was the original question again?
It was, what's the biggest change in your personality over the last year?
Sometimes we still have to, say what we believe and make a stand and make sure that we're standing in a place with integrity. We're not just full of shit.
Yeah.
But, there's a lot of instances, and they become easier to identify when you get older.
Yes.
You just don't have to run head first into the red flag that the bullfighter is waving in front of you. You just don't have to. There are other ways to deal with it. And they end up being more efficient and generally lead to better outcomes.
That was really well said. I love that analogy. You don't have to run into the red flag. Very good, man. Hey, listen, let me tell people where to find you. And thank you. I appreciate everything, man. Thanks very much. Again, it's okay. First of all, if you're not familiar with Bryan's bass playing, listen to some of the work he's done with Vai, with Satriani, with the Aristocrats. And you can find him online at Bryan. His name is spelled with a Y, Bryan Beller, BELLER.com.
Thank you very much.
I would love you to check out his last record, Scenes from the Flood. And he's going to come on. Like I said, it's one of the best records I've heard this year. It's just phenomenal. So he's going to come back on the show. We'll talk about that. Oh, that's great. And again, has Satriani.
I look forward to coming back. I look forward to coming back and talking about that.
Thank you. So do I. John Petrucci's on there, Mike Dawes, Guthrie Govan, and Mike Keneally. So there's a massive cast of incredible guitar players. It's just a great record, man. And that's it. And any social media stuff you want to promote or that you're on?
Yeah, I'm just, I'm on Facebook at Bryan Beller Bass. I'm on Instagram at Bryan Beller Bass, and I'm on Twitter at just Bryan Beller.
Great. Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Man, thank you. I look forward to coming back on. We'll talk about the record, Scenes from the Flood. Everybody check it out. It's a great record. So this way you can be all amped up when Bryan comes back on the show to talk about it. Thanks for your time. And I
thank you, Craig. I really look forward to that and getting deep into kind of like all the different guitarists. We haven't even, there's more guitarists than you even mentioned about all these different guitarists and what they brought to that album. It really ended up being kind of almost like a celebration of guitar by accident.
Awesome. Awesome. And Darren Charles, thank you again, brother.
Yes. Thank you, Darren.
Everybody, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this, please share it on your social media channels. We appreciate your support. Thanks very much to Bryan Beller for coming on the show. Again, check out Bryan online. It's Bryan Beller, BELLER.com, and hit him up on his socials and check out his music. And most important, don't forget, especially nowadays, man, remember that happiness is a choice. So choose wisely. be nice. Go play your guitar and your bass and have fun. Till next time, peace and love, everybody. I'm out. Thank you, Bryan. Appreciate it.
Thanks, man.